Welcome to the Deeper Into Movies podcast. My name is Stephen T. Hanley. I'm the founder and lead curator of Deeper Into Movies. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by writer, director Mike Leigh. Mike Leigh is one of the greatest living filmmakers, and for BFI, that's British Film Institute, are hosting a retrospective of his work right now. Celebrating his career, and at the center, they have a beautiful 4K restoration of his 1993 masterpiece, Naked. Naked for me and for a lot of my friends is Mike Leigh's masterpiece, arguably the greatest British film ever made. And a lot of the times people will ask me, actor friends and such, what films should I watch for knockout performances? And always I say David Thewlis's performance in Naked as Johnny is the bar. Absolutely fearless performance. And yeah, he's just untouchable. Naked is Mike's brilliant and controversial portrait of male angst and social dislocation. As I said, it's a landmark performance from David Thewlis, who plays Johnny, the anti-hero of the film. Frantic and destructive, he's an outsider who tears through the lives of everyone like an emotional tornado. He's on the run from Manchester, and he moves in without ask to his girlfriend's flat in East London. London listeners, if you want to go to the house, it's in Dalston, 3 or 4 minutes from the Rio, if you want to make a pilgrimage. I got invited to a screening of Naked to do some homework before my interview with Mike, and the film still retains all its power. It's so nihilistic and punk and doesn't let the audience off the hook. It still felt really unsafe and tender and dark. And I really can't stress how fucking radical this film was in Mike Leigh's career and filmography. Nobody expected him to make a film like this. I don't think anyone had seen a film like this before. He was already making amazing films, and everyone knew him as the, air quotes, gritty British drama director, kitchen sink, realism, and he was great at all of that and doing amazing work, as I said. But to come out of left field with this fucking radical, ultra dark nocturnal odyssey with David Thewlis as this character, kind of channeling Marky Smith from The Fall, ranting about the apocalypse with all these theories of the end of a world and the pre-millennium tension, and battling his existence and just destroying everyone he meets, just eviscerating them. It was just incredible. Yeah, and I think as Mike says in our interview, the film is dealing with so much that he defies anyone to give it a nice soundbite in one sentence. Well, wow, what a film.
Good morning.
Morning. Thank you for taking time to talk.
No, it's a pleasure.
So I was kindly invited to go see the 4K restoration of Naked at the BFI, and it lost none of its power. But it was strange because I remember this was one of the first films I saw when I really became obsessed with cinema at age 13 or 14. I remember renting it at the video store, but probably too young to watch it. And I watch it every few years, but watching on the big screen, I found it really powerful and affecting.
Well, that's interesting because my Leo's brother, his elder brother Toby, came and saw it at the BFI the other week. He said he'd got obviously got a different perspective on it. He saw different and probably that's what you're talking about too, is it? That you know.
Yeah, when I first watched it, I'd always say, oh, it's such a nihilistic film and Johnny is such a nihilist. But when I was watching it this week, I was kind of realizing that no, he's not a nihilist. He's angry, but also afraid. And he's obviously battling with these big theories of mortality and disappointment. And I don't know, I remember that expression, I was born, never asked. And I kind of, that's what I was kind of feeling from him this time. A lot more, I don't know if sympathy is the right word, but yeah, I got a completely different perspective on the character.
I think that's right.
Time.
I mean, the thing is, there are two things really. One is that it never occurred to me. Yeah, you're familiar, obviously, with Happy-Go-Lucky.
For sure, yeah.
In some way, Johnny and Poppy are kind of siblings, or the reverse sides of a coin. What they have in common is they're both idealists.
Yes.
And the difference is that Johnny is a frustrated idealist. She, is a positive idealist and deals with it and confronts stuff, reflected as to how they would get on.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, of course, that with reference to what you were just reporting as to your feelings about it, is that, of course, when it came out, it was accused particularly by a militant feminist minority. When it first came out, of being misogynist and Johnny is a cynic, and he's not a cynic at all, as we've just said, he's an idealist. I defy anybody to say what the film is about in a sentence, because it's about so many things on so many levels, I think. And the more I've kind of come back and revisited it, the more I realize the multiplicity and complexity of the idea, what was the feelings and ideas in that order that I was dealing with, that we were putting into it.
You've said that seeds of ideas for films have sometimes stayed in your brain for many, many years before they rise to the surface, or you take that idea and you begin building from it. And in the case of Naked, I read that in the 1950s in your school in Manchester, there was a teacher who would constantly remind you that the next full solar eclipse would be in 1999. And I was wondering, that's a really strange thing for a teacher to keep on reminding kids. And I was wondering, was that the spark that started Naked?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that that's quite literally.
Right.
I don't think there's quite such a direct line. It was the headmaster at the primary school, which we left to go to the secondary school in 1954. So we were must have been about 8 or 9 or 10 when he said, "When you are all 56, in August 1999, there will be the next total eclipse." And of course, the previous total eclipse, which my dad talked about and this guy talked about, had been in 1929 or something. So that was a thing. But I couldn't say that was an idea which I carried through for all those decades as such. It is the case that in the early 90s, I had a notion, maybe it was something to do with that, the impending eclipse, but more an awareness that the millennium was going to happen in 8 years' time. We made it in 1992, Naked. And nobody was talking about it. Nobody was, I mean, just to get to the essence of what you just said. I mean, I'm sure you know that on the whole, what happens with my films is that we embark on a blind journey and discover what the film is, on that journey of making it, really. And we ultimately, even though we spend months preparing characters and relationships and all that, we make the film up on location. And Naked is famously a case in point where we couldn't decide how to end it until very late in the day. And it ends the way it does because I suddenly spotted it whilst driving down the road in the direction of the house. I suddenly got this image of him stumbling down the road, and that fed back into deciding which motivation which route we should take as to what he actually does at the end. So the only films I've made where I sat on an idea for a long time were particularly Vera Drake, because I'm old enough to remember what it was like before the 1967 Abortion Act, when people had unwanted pregnancies. I mean, but mostly, and Naked is no exception. It really, I'd be hard put to say precisely what was the starting point. I mean, one of the things was that David Thewlis had been in Life is Sweet. I worked with him a couple of times before. And his part, because of the dramatic narrative requirements, his part of the anorexic girl's boyfriend really only wound up as a relatively brief appearance. So when I talked to him, and I was going to do another film, and I said, how do you feel about being? He said, well, how do I know that won't happen again?
Right.
And I said, look, whatever happens, I promise you'll get a substantial slice of the pie. And so that was a kind of conceptual starting point, because then I sit down and sort of start to be, creative and inventive and imaginative and work with the actors and stuff.
David said that on one of your first meetings, you asked him to go through all the men he has met in his life, and you gradually narrowed down the list, and then you landed on a character from his past, and you said, maybe this is going to be the basis for the character. I was wondering, how do you know when you've found the character? Do you just have a gut? Do you have a gut instinct, or is it something more?
I mean, honestly, with all due respect, ask the same question of any novelist, painter, sculptor, poet, music maker. That's what we artists do. You make it, you have you think, yeah, I'll go with this, or you just get a feeling, or you get an idea, or whatever it is. I mean, that's what it's all about. It's right. About making it up. It's what, as I say, it's what the creative process is. So, and of course, don't forget that I'm sitting down with him, and parallel to that, I'm also sitting down at the same time, like him in the morning, Leslie Sharp in the afternoon, Catherine Cartledge the following morning, whatever it is, working out other characters. By the way, incidentally, the process you've just outlined very accurately about asking an actor to make a long list of people, make a list sometimes of people they know, is standard procedure. That's how all the characters in all my films have come into existence. And by the way, for a long time, David on Naked was the record holder because he had over 100 people on his list. However, that was completely blown out of the water by Sally Hawkins, who hit over 200 when Happy Go Lucky.
Something I really noticed seeing the film again was, obviously, David Thewlis' performance is just incredible. It's one of the best performances I've ever seen. But so is Leslie Sharp. And, she's kind of a straight guy to David Thewlis in a way. And I was thinking, if all the other cast weren't as good, they would just get blown off the screen by David Thewlis because he's so incredible. His delivery, the physicality, he's funny, he's literate, he's frantic, destructive, unpredictable, and he's got that vitriolic mouth, but weirdly he's really magnetic. But Leslie Sharp is as good as Thewlis in the film, I think, in her own way. And that scene in the bathroom between the two is just so beautiful and tender. You can really see the history of David's character through her interactions with him.
Well, I mean, the fact is, to take a clear and objective view of it, I would be hard put to say that in terms of, if we mark them, if they give them marks out of 10 the quality of everything they do,
Right.
none of them, they all score 10. None of them score less than David. They're all doing it. I mean, they're all doing it. I mean, Gina McKee, who plays the young woman who picks up in the cafe and goes.
The cafe girl, yeah, that's a beautiful performance.
I mean, that's a completely. I mean, it's such a subtle and grounded performance. And Peter White playing Brian, the security guy.
Incredible.
That's not. I mean, because you're talking about not just good acting and not just good character acting, but you're talking about also all the research is going on in there. I mean, all the knowledge and stuff. It's really I mean, they all get 10 out of 10, really. And of course, you don't make a film with one character. I mean, people are interacting with each other. And of course, who we haven't mentioned, who deserves massive mention always, is Catherine Cartledge.
Yes.
Who, of course, as you know, died about a decade later out of the blue at the age of 39.
How was the rehearsal process and shoot for Peter's scene? That's just such an incredible verbal sparring match that they had between them.
Well, I mean, we happened to be doing all the development, our rehearsal space.
Mm-hmm.
We always get some empty building to operate in. It happened to be what had been, I think, in a London Education Authority office block in Marylebone in London. And we began by having created Brian, the security guard, of setting up improvisation in that building and just sort of exploring it, really. And then later we went, I mean, I think what's interesting about that sequence when it came to constructing it and shooting it is that we actually got the building. It's actually in the film is in Charlotte Street, parallel to Tottenham Court Road, and we'd invented the fact that he was a security guard guarding a working office, a working office block, and the production designer Alison Chitty, who's something of a genius, and who does operas mostly now, not film. She came in one day. She said, "I've had an idea." She said, "What about if you, instead of a working office block, what if he was guarding an empty office, but just guarding space?" And I said, "That's fantastic. That is so relevant." I mean, just to digress for a moment, what's important to understand, we've been talking so far just about actors, but of course, the contribution of the cinematographer, who's always been Dick Pope since Life is Sweet, mm-hmm. and the production designer and the costume designer, and indeed the makeup designer, is massively important. And there's always a stage during the period while I'm developing the stuff with the actors, when I, by an agreed date, sit down with these guys and share what I think is evolving, where I think we're going, mm-hmm. so that they can start to prepare the what they have to. I think it's dark. It's kind of nocturnal. Mm-hmm. It's this guy, this solo journey, etc. I said, I think it's kind of monochromatic in some way, even though mm-hmm. we knew we were going to shoot a movie in color. And Dick decided to shoot some tests. He decided to go for was in the days of celluloid, called the bleach bypass mm-hmm. process, where you miss out one of the things that happens in the lab. And we looked at a couple of Terence Davis's first things, which had used that process. And he shot tests. And so we got that discipline on the go. And Alison Chitty, the designer, took on the decision to be very, very selective and monochromatic mm-hmm. about what's actually when it was in front of the camera. And you will if you look carefully, her decision to be very, very rigorous about not having reds and being very monochromatic in terms of what was actually in front of the camera, separate from how the camera, mm-hmm. how the photography was being treated, results in the fact that if you look carefully in the office block, you will see a grey fire bell.
That's amazing. Yeah, I did realize that it almost has a film noir look. There's just so much beautiful black and grey and charcoal textures throughout the whole thing, from the close to the streets.
Yes, I mean, it's very interesting to make a film in color, which it has that I think monochromatic feeling. And of course, it meant because of how it was how Dick was treating it. Of course, the same applied in the exteriors as well. You know, and so when another performance we haven't mentioned is Claire Skinner, who brings a completely different tone to the end of the film when she shows up from Zimbabwe as Sandra.
Yes.
Flat it is, it's one of my favorite moments is when the taxi pulls up and she gets out lugging all this stuff upstairs in her sort of safari type costume, you know, and discovers all this shit that's going on in a flat.
Yeah, I was really excited to see her get. I knew what was going to happen, so I was really excited to see her get dropped into this mix.
Yeah, and it's a great performance because she's great. She's a great character actor, Claire Skinner, and it's a masterly piece of acting because the thing about Sandra, as we created her, is she can't finish a sentence. It's very clever, you know.
I heard a story that the police were called during one of your rehearsals outside a church where you just instructed David Thewlis and Ewan Bremner to meet. I think you just said to David, you're going to meet an actor for a rehearsal, be here at this church.
Yeah, it wasn't a night. It was actually in broad daylight outside the church in Marylebone. It should have, I mean, the action in the film indeed took place at night. I think I've already decided that later, but no, they were improvising when they first met, and Ewan Bremner as Archie was standing in the street in Marylebone in broad daylight shouting, "Maggie! Maggie!" And somebody leaned out of an upstairs window and told him to shut up, and he told him to fuck off. And about 3 minutes later, a cop car screeched to a halt and the cops jumped out. And that is what I do when all these things happen is I lurch behind a wall, behind a wall, keeping it out of sight, but clocking what's happening. And the magic words are, from me, and it only has to come from me, come out of character. So the cops pull up, they jump out, and they're ready to pounce on these guys and give them a hard time. And I jump out and say, come out of character, whereupon these two blokes on the steps immediately change their mode of behavior. And I say to the cops, we're making a film. And of course they say, where's the camera? Well, the camera was about 6 weeks away. So anyway, we managed to bail ourselves out. But I was going to say we were talking about the office block, and you were asking me about the evolution of that action. And when we decided, because what we do during the course of the shooting period, always, is to stand down the crew and have rehearsal chunks of time so we can create and script and build the actual scenes in the location. And I said, look, we have to rehearse this at nighttime. We can't do that in the day. So we went into nighttime mode for a stretch of time. And in fact, we shot it in nighttime mode as well. And so it meant that because my films, people say, well, they're about people. They are, but they're also about place. Place plays a big part. And that sequence is as good a case in point. You know, I mean, that office block, including its round window and everything, absolutely informs the spirit of the action. And at one point in the middle of the night, I went and sat down in a corner, having set up an improvisation, and waited in the dark. And the lights went on through behind these windows, and the guys came in, and then they came into the space beforehand and were silhouetted with the lights in the other room, having not yet put the lights on in the and then that gave me that image. I thought, oh fuck, great, wow, So I mean, you discover the movie, and I couldn't have sat in a room like this one and thought that up. I mean, you just can't. I mean, it is organic, and it happens by being there, and that is how everything you see in all my films has come into existence.
It's interesting you say you shot at night, because one of the things that it really captured for me, especially when Johnny's in Soho at night, is those type of strange conversations and interactions I remember having in, especially the 90s pre-mobile phone era, where you would be waiting for a night bus and overhear a strange
Yeah,
conversation
yeah,
going, or an
yeah.
argument, or even at parties when you get to 3 or 4 in the morning, the discussions often get heavier or maybe take quite a surreal or heavy tone.
Yeah, and actually, the scene when he meets Archie outside Lena's stores in Brewer Street, um, is that we obviously we rehearsed the actual action and dialogue very precisely elsewhere, but then we planted it there and we actually shot it overnight. And somebody asked me the other day, well, surely people kept coming up and saying, "What are you doing?" But of course, no. It being Soho in the middle of the night, no one took a blind bit of notice, basically. I mean, everyone was just getting on with it. And so we had lots of real people walking past, real cars. The only thing that happened by way of anybody reacting to the fact that we were shooting a film there is down the alleyway on that corner. There's a brothel. There are obviously lots of brothels in that area. Mm-hmm. And the girl sent down a message saying, "Can you please go away? You're distracting our clients."
So I'm really curious, why do you stay out of sight from the actors as they're rehearsing in public? I'm guessing, is it because you'll get something different, obviously, when there's no crew or director's eye on them, even to the point where you're hiding behind a wall or something?
No, yeah, well, that's true. I mean, obviously, I don't want to stand right next to them. I mean, no, it depends. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, if we're rehearsing in a small house, which is or a small room, then I sit in the corner. I mean, it's not, the important thing is not what I'm doing. I mean, obviously, my job is what I certainly do when an improvisation is shut up. I mean, famously, it didn't happen very much in Naked, but for example, the big sequence in Vera Drake when the cops come around to arrest her,
yeah,
or the long sequence at the end of Secrets and Lies when all the truth comes out, those were achieved by having, in the case of Vera Drake, an 11-hour improvisation that went on continuously for 11 hours with them in character, in costume, and not knowing, and nobody ever knows what they wouldn't know. So they didn't know that there were some guys playing cops, and she didn't know that the family didn't know she was an abortion, all that stuff, and my job is to answer your question, is to shut up, listen and learn, and sit there thinking, yes, no, oh, I see, no, if that happens, but maybe that should happen. I mean, as a dramatist, as a storyteller, mm-hmm. That's my function. So it's partly about the organic development of the characters and their relationships and all that, and the acting, but it's also me seeing in an organic way raw material spin itself, so that I then get notions about how to then take that and distill it or convert it or whatever into the narrative, dramatic, cinematic material.
Am I right in thinking Vera Drake, there was, I think maybe the son at the dinner table was completely unaware of that she was conducting abortions?
Nobody, no, they were all unaware of it.
Right, that's why the reactions were so incredible.
Yeah, totally. When they didn't know. I mean, the whole point was she'd, and we've been developing those characters and exploring the relationships for like 3 months, and only Imelda and I, but she, of course. What they didn't know is that parallel to those rehearsals that they were coming to, those sessions, there were other sessions with various actresses playing various women who had unwanted pregnancies. And what she didn't know is that one of them had gone wrong. And they all didn't know that some actors were playing doctors and nurses, apart from some that are playing cops. They didn't know that I'd spent several days with the guys playing cops with a retired detective superintendent from the Metropolitan Police who had been around at the time before the 1967 Abortion Act and knew all about that. I mean, all of those things go on. Well, that is standard across all of these films. That's how it works, basically. But the important thing is the end product. And the end product is when you kind of distill all this together and arrive at what's on the screen.
You're telling all the different actors only little bits of information that they need to know for their performance, and you're keeping some of them in the dark, and they're not even sure what the full film is, but it all comes together, and you've got to keep all these, I guess, pieces of a jigsaw in your brain and know it's all going to fit together and it's all going to gel.
It's what an artist does. I mean, whether you're painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome, or whether you're drawing daily cartoons for The Guardian, or whether you're carving, sculptures, whatever you're doing, it is about the interaction between you and the material and ideas and feelings and all of those things. And, how many novelists have you heard saying, well, I didn't really know where it was going or what was going to happen, but I got a message back from what I'd written the previous day, and suddenly I thought, the character dictated what should.
Absolutely,
those things. But so, I don't. What doesn't happen, because it wouldn't make any sense, and it's not what I've just been talking about. It's the opposite of what I've just said. I don't simply say, "Oh, well, that happened, and therefore that's what happened." Mm-hmm. I mean, for example, in we've just been talking about the. You referred to the son, Danny Mays' character in Vera Drake. Yeah, he just didn't want to know. He just fucked off. He was furious about the whole thing. And that's there in the film, but you don't see him leave. You see him, we use that and explore that. And you see him, it slowly comes round. It's persuaded by his dad. And similarly in Secrets and Lies, Claire Rushbrook played the white daughter, who just, as soon as it was announced that the young black woman was her half sister, she just, in the improvisation, the 10-hour improvisation, she just grabbed the boyfriend and left. They literally left, and it took us ages to find them because we were rehearsing in the actual house, and we had to really negotiate the motivation that would make her come back into the house, which eventually was the boyfriend saying, "Maybe you should," and that she said, "Well, if he said that, because up to now he's been something of a wimp, she would do it." So she did, and that meant we could explore the rest of the action. And Naked there's a lot of all. I mean, Naked comes completely out of such exploration. I mean, we set up the premise of the girl from the cafe because she's living in. I mean, one of the elements of Naked, as you know, is that. The thing of being in an environment that's not yours. Mm-hmm. So he shows up at the beginning to the flat, and he says, "Well, what are all these souvenirs of Sandra's trips around the world?" Yeah, the girl from the cafe. Obviously there are two gay guys who've gone to America, and somehow she's house sitting. Well, the actress had no input into that flat. Alison Chitty and I, the designer, invented the characters, and everything that's there was what we thought they would have had. But so I set up the premise of that, and the premise of this girl who's had a bit of a tortured experience of one kind or the other, without knowing what really was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And then we explored it through improvisation, and what was great is that, contrary to what you expect, that he's going to go in and attack her sexually in some way or the other, or in fact it takes a completely different kind of route, because it's a function of their two characters, and it's a very important scene for that reason. But one had to sort of explore it organically before then distilling it into something that makes some kind of coherent dramatic meaning, although it's probably one of the more enigmatic elements of the film.
How was the mood on set? Did you feel you were making something special at the time?
Yes, I mean, actually, it was good. The mood's pretty good on my shoots. It got a little bit oppressed because we were shooting it into the winter, mm-hmm. and it was getting dark, and we were under pressure to get it done for various reasons. I mean, it got quite, at one point, it got a little bit heavy because what was going on was a bit heavy. But you know what? Everyone was great and had a great sense of humor and all. I mean, I think the only thing that was a real fuck up on the film was that we had terrible caterers.
Food is so important.
I know. And there was a week's gap so that we could construct the end of the film. And I said to my producer, look, it was so bad that on the night shoots, members of the crew were paying it in a Turkish restaurant, an Indian restaurant on 2 different occasions. I mean, film crews don't pay for their own supper, but these guys were, the food was. So I said, look, here, listen, it would be great if you could sack the caterer and get the different ones. And they did. He did. And when the guys came back from the week's break, while we'd been rehearsing, and these great new caterers were there. I mean, grown men wept. But it was a great shoot, it was good, And also, I'll tell you what's important about the shoot and the crew is, there was some heavy-duty sexual things going on.
Mm-hmm.
In the old days, if you had anything sexual, an actress would be surrounded by men on the crew, men on the camera, men on the boom, on recording the sound, everybody. We had a woman focus puller, woman art director. Obviously, the script continuity person was a woman. We had a woman boom swinger, and so it was a very much more, in that sense, it was quite an enlightened, sort of a more relaxing and less oppressive show atmospheres, really. And you couldn't have made that film with a macho crew.
And were you surprised by the response and critical acclaim? I read something great that Spielberg and Scorsese loved the film.
They do.
Did they reach out to you directly? Did you get to hear their thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I've met them both on a number of occasions, and they're fans. I mean, Coppola actually thought that Topsy Turvy was one of the best films ever.
Wow, that's great.
So I mean, it was really Scorsese and Coppola were. I mean, Spielberg has been nice about it, but it was actually Coppola and Scorsese who were particularly enthusiastic about the film.
How has the response been at the BFI screenings for this film?
Great. No, I mean, look, people get it and they dig it, and that's it's. I mean, as to being surprised by the response, I mean, the first big surprise was he went to Cannes, because up to that time, I never thought in a million years I'd make a film that went to Cannes, because Cannes was about something else, just like the BAFTAs. I never thought, I made all these very popular television films in the 1970s and early 80s, and they were never, ever considered for a split second for the BAFTAs. But then, I've had more recent films that weren't considered for BAFTAs either. So there you go. And then we won at Cannes, which was great.
Strange question to end on. Arnold Schwarzenegger turned up at your screening for Naked. Is that true?
Where was that?
I think it was David Thewlis who said that Arnold Schwarzenegger turned up to your red carpet at Cannes.
Oh, yes, he did. No, that's right. I remember now. I'd forgotten. No, he did. But I know what happened. Yeah, of course. I remember now. What actually happened was, I don't know why it slipped my mind. Maybe because it's not that important. But maybe I should take it more seriously. No, he did. We were on the red carpet. That's right. And he swanned in and got a big cheer. He was going to watch the film. And he went in and left through a side exit and went off somewhere else. So it's not really true to say he came to see the film. He didn't. He was there, and we know he left because people saw him go. They went into the building and left through a side door and went off to some other event. So maybe that's probably why I didn't remember. But now you've reminded me. I will never forget again because it's a good story and it's true.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk, Mike.
Not at all. Thank you, man. Thank you, Steve. Great. See you again.
There we go. Me and Mike Leigh. That last story was just spectacular. Thanks to my podcast engineer, Ewan Henselwood, Joshua Eustace, aka Telephone Tel Aviv, for my beautiful music. And this isn't a sponsored advert, but I want to shout it out because I love what they're doing. The BFI are releasing Naked on the 29th of November, 4K Blu-ray restoration. And they're releasing Mike Leigh's debut, Bleak Moments, from 1971. All beautifully repackaged. The transfers have been overseen by Dick Pope and Mike Leigh himself. And you know I love physical media, so go purchase these wonderful films. Wow, we had Mike Leigh on the podcast. That's amazing. Deeper into movies. Thanks for listening. See you next time.